If you take a virtual reality game and port it into flat screen, what do you have left? Unfortunately, for many VR games, taking the headset away results in a totally playable flat screen game. This is a failure of the developers. Great VR games that take advantage of what it means to be in a virtual world can never just be ported to flat screen and work. This is because they explore interesting mechanics and situations only possible in VR. Which is why I hate VR horror games. VR horror should scare me the most because it has the unique ability to put me inside the game I'm playing. But sadly, most VR horror games are wasted potential. Wraith the Oblivion Afterlife is a VR horror game you haven't played, and if you ported that into flat screen, it would be a generic horror game. Nothing about it really takes advantage of what it means to be a VR game. But the funny part is, this game is still terrifying. VR has the power to make bad horror games good, generic horror games great, and incredible horror games religious experiences. That's why I absolutely love Into the Radius. If you ported Into the Radius into flat screen, you wouldn't have a game left, because it's a game that truly takes advantage of being in VR and is one of the best VR games ever made. Into the Radius is a survival horror game where you explore the aftermath of a disaster known as the Pechorsk Incident in the small Soviet town of Pechorsk, an incident which created a big basketball in the sky, scary monsters, anomalies, and valuable artifacts in the surrounding area. Got it? Good. You are Explorer number 61, tasked with exploring the Radius for valuable items to bring back from the affected zone for cash. A few of you probably heard that and thought, okay, this is like Stalker. And you wouldn't be wrong. While they are similar, if you buy Into the Radius expecting Stalker in VR, you'll be disappointed. Calling this game Stalker VR is misleading. It would be like if a phone reviewer said, this phone is like an iPhone, but a Nokia. It makes the experience of using that Nokia infinitely worse, because in the back of your head you'll be thinking, man, this is nothing like an iPhone. The truth is, they're different. Both games are incredible, but they're incredible for different reasons. Reviewing Into the Radius through the lens of Stalker VR is quite frankly a waste of my time and a waste of your time. Now can I move on with my review? Thanks. Into the Radius is great for many reasons, but I think the best part is it's a game that makes you feel powerless. It's an uncommon trait in most modern-day AAA titles. Most games like to assure you you're a very important little boy, and if you die, the prophecy would go unfulfilled, and yada yada yada. AAA jargon. In Into the Radius, you are an explorer. No, not the explorer, just an explorer. You're just the 61st guy they sent in there. The fact is, Into the Radius does not care about the player. If you died in the Radius, the UNPSC, which is the mega corporation that tasked you with bringing the stuff out of the Radius, would probably just send another poor bastard in your place. With all the stuff you have to go through to get these guys the things they need, they still charge you for your breakfast. The world of Into the Radius feels so inhumane because its roots lie in cosmic horror. Cosmic horror is defined by horror beyond our comprehension. Into the Radius would just not work if you felt important. The weapons also help with how powerless the game makes you feel. Usually, the inclusion of weapons in a horror game like this ruins some of the tension. It is really hard to create a fearful environment when you also happen to have a shotgun in your hands. However, this isn't the case with Into the Radius. In fact, the combat in this game actually makes it even scarier. Unlike other games like Fallout 4 VR, where reloading is a simple press of a button, in Into the Radius, you have to manually load every single bullet into your magazines and constantly keep track of your ammo. This makes you feel more vulnerable and adds to the fear. You also have to keep track of your magazines and reuse them once they're empty. You can also modify your weapons, and you need to maintain their durability by cleaning them after use. All of these factors combined create a sense of realism that makes the combat in the game truly frightening. The game is at its best when you're on your last full mag, over-encumbered, and trying to make your way home before the sun sets. It's in these scenarios that the combat truly shines and adds to the overall fear factor of the game. Creating a first-person shooter that feels scary is a difficult task, but Into the Radius has managed to do just that. So gold star to you, CM Games. My underwear is completely ruined. And the Radius itself also helps create an environment of fear. The Radius feels more like a character rather than a map. Half-Life was a revolutionary game for many reasons, but I would argue the most game-changing part was the concept of a game's story happening around you. Things in Half-Life felt like they would happen even if you weren't there to witness it. Into the Radius takes this to the extreme because the Radius itself tells a story. You feel a sense of dread wandering through a place like Pobeda Factory. As you walk through the cramped, dark hallways, you feel fear, obviously. But you also feel a sense of sadness, knowing that at some point, people worked here. It's a world that makes you feel emotions just by existing in it. This once great place where people lived, people with families and dreams not so different from our own, is now a wasteland full of monsters. The world of Into the Radius is already scary, but you can always feel a sense of tragedy mixed in with how scary it is. The game also succeeds at telling a story through its world with its environmental storytelling. For example, there are cigarette butts all over the place in this factory. This reminds the player that people were here at one point, and these people were clearly stressed out by the work they were doing, and used cigarettes as a way to cope with long hours. You might not notice this, but your brain does, and this adds to the environment. The Radius itself is also constantly out to get you. Anomalies are things that behave like invisible landmines. You need to use these things called probes to detect them since they're not visible to the naked eye. Distortion anomalies rapidly drain your health if you accidentally stumble into them, while reflector anomalies will punch your probes back at you at high speeds if you choose to throw one at them. These anomalies are a constant threat and make the game more challenging and immersive. The anomalies are there to guard these things called artifacts. You can detect artifacts by using this detector. Once it starts to beep, you know you're near one. I love finding artifacts. Detecting where anomalies are by throwing probes at them while trying to navigate around them to get an artifact is one of those things that can only be done in VR. My only real criticism of this mechanic is that the probes are unlimited, so you can just spam them. Wouldn't it be cooler if you had to bring multiple bags of probes and conserve the amount you used? Still though, it's a minor criticism. This mechanic makes the world feel more imposing. It's a mechanic that makes the world feel big and the player feel small. Another thing Into the Radius knocks out of the park is sound design. The game has truly nailed the art of sound design, which is an often overlooked part in most horror games. But I'd argue, sound design is one of the most important parts of creating a spooky experience. Dead Space was a game with immaculate sound design. Tension was built just over the sound alone. Now imagine if it was replaced with country music. It would hardly scare you, would it? The developers use sound to create fear in the absolute best places. The atmosphere of Into the Radius is also some of the best I've ever seen playing a video game. The game manages to create an eerie, foreboding feeling that lingers throughout the entire experience. I was genuinely scared by simply existing in this game, which is a testament to VR's immersive power. Into the Radius really takes advantage of its medium. The fact that it's in VR only heightens the experience further. However, it's not all sunshine and rainbows. The enemies in particular leave something to be desired. There are only 6 enemies in the game, which is already not a lot. I know I said I wouldn't compare this game to Stalker, but in Stalker there are 19 unique and cool looking enemies. 2 of the enemies in Into the Radius are literally the exact same. Out of the 6 enemies, only 3 bring something cool and original to the table. Sliders are able to teleport and do damage, Seekers run towards you with their weak point being their heads, and spawns are terrifying and jump at you. Mimics are also worth mentioning. They look like policemen, but are gooey? Is that how you would describe this? I don't know. The mimics, unlike other enemies, can actually talk to you. They sing lullabies and imitate the voices of children. Keep in mind, besides from the Solus UNPSC guy, you haven't heard anybody talk to you at all throughout this game. So imagine hearing someone for the first time in this cold, dark wasteland, and it being, well, this. They also actually have good AI running for cover while shooting at you. Despite all this talk about lack of enemy and enemy variety, I personally don't think it has a huge impact on the game. Despite there being only about 4 standout enemies, I still find them scary even after 50 hours of gameplay. However, it's not hard to imagine how much better the game could be with more variety. But I can't really expect that much because it's still an indie team working on this. But as it stands, this is less of a criticism and more of an observation on how the game can be improved. With that all being said, there still is something about this game. A feeling that takes me back to my first time playing a horror game. It was Five Nights at Freddy's on my iPad. I was 8 years old, and I had 0 experience playing horror games. And it absolutely destroyed me. I was having nightmare after nightmare, and yet I still came back to the game. Despite the fact that the game scared 8-year-old me, I couldn't stop playing it back then. And the feelings I got as an 8-year-old in Five Nights at Freddy's are the same feelings I get now in Into the Radius. Despite the game trying to scare me at all times, I can't stop coming back to it. They also added a guitar. As I navigate through this unforgiving world, I'm struck by an overwhelming sense of unease, as if I'm walking through the remnants of a civilization long forgotten. I can't explain why the game makes me feel the way it does. It's a feeling of foreboding, of knowing that something terrible has happened here, and that I'm a mere visitor to a place where I don't belong. As I explore the ruins of what once was a great place, I can't help but think of the people who once lived here, people with dreams and hopes for the future. And yet, all that remains now are the crumbling remains of their once great civilization, a stark reminder of the fragility of human existence. The Radius is a reminder of our humanity, and how temporary happiness is. It's a reminder that everything can be taken away in an instant, and the world we live in is in a constant state of change. And yet, amidst the ruins, there is a beauty that can't be denied, a reminder that even in the darkest times, there's still a glimmer of hope. This is why Into the Radius is an absolute masterpiece.